So, it's been a very long time.
Yes, it has.
We're currently in the new year, the 11th of January. And I couldn't even, it was the start of December, I think, that we recorded the last one. Or possibly somewhere in November.
Somewhere around there, yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely at least a month ago. Because every time we've tried to record, something's
just come up.
My personal life, issues, just logistics.
It's just your personal life, you being ill, me being ill.
Yeah, exactly.
And the new year came around and we just couldn't pretty much do anything for a little bit.
Yeah.
As Christmas wrapped up.
Yeah. But new year, and we'll start again. And with the new year and starting again, the first video episode.
This video episode, indeed. That is going to take some getting used to.
It will get better quality because right now it's just a webcam. We do have an actual camera somewhere that does very good quality.
Okay.
And it's still packed away, so.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so we'll figure it out. Like I say, we have got another microphone. However, again, at the minute, we can't use both. So.
No. So we had a few ideas about what we were going to do for this episode.
Yeah, and for some reason, the episode we was going to record is clearly just a cursed episode.
Yeah.
Because as soon as we changed his mind to doing this one, it's happened first time. So it's clearly just a cursed episode.
We may do it at some point.
Yeah.
Once we get settled in a bit more, but
yeah, definitely. But
for now, we might as well stick with something, simple. Something simple. Something that everybody will know.
Yeah, well, this is one of the most famous historical figures.
Yep.
Even people that don't know or care about history know who Napoleon Bonaparte is.
And with the recent release of the movie.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I haven't seen that. Have you seen it?
I haven't. I've seen reviews saying it's not very good.
Yeah, I think it's sort of a give and take sort of thing. I think it's based on historical events, but that's it.
Based on historical events rather than being a historical documentary.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. I think that's the best way to describe it. So it's like a historical dramatisation. So like I say, we'll probably watch it.
Probably.
This episode might convince me to watch it because this is definitely Matthew's episode.
Yes. Yes, as you've said.
Yeah, this is definitely Matthew's area of expertise, I suppose is the word.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah, this is. I know I can hold my own in a conversation, but when it comes to get essentially a podcast worth of information, I don't. This is definitely not my strong suit.
Well, I suppose we should start wherever anybody else would start, at the beginning.
Yeah, he was born in Corsica.
Corsica, specifically the capital of Corsica. I think it's called Ajaccio or something?
Ajaccio. Something along. It's French. Well,
no,
technically
it's not French.
Italian.
It's Corsican.
Yeah, technically it's French Corsica at the time of Napoleon being born.
Yes, but it was only like that for about just over a year
because it was Genoan/Italian before.
Yeah, and pretty much.
Was Genoa a republic or Kingdom?
Genoa was a republic.
Yeah, and I think France. I can't remember. Was it a war? I can't remember. Because obviously they gave Corsica to the French, did Italy?
Yeah, Genoa did give Corsica to the French because of being constantly rebelled against and everything.
Yeah. And then it carried on. The Corsicans revolted against the French. Napoleon's father being one of those people that rebelled.
Yeah,
along with another man that will come into more prominence later on in Napoleon's life as well.
Yeah. it was specifically under the banner of like the Corsican nationalist movement under Pasquale Paoli, I believe is the name.
Paoli.
Paoli. There we go.
Yeah.
We're not fluent in other languages, as you can tell.
I only know certain words because that book I was telling you about, it's an audio book. And they pronounce the names and words.
They pronounce names, yeah.
So I sort of, that's the only reason I know a little bit.
Yeah.
But so he was born, with him being Corsican, his birth name wasn't actually Napoleon Bonaparte.
No, it was closer to Napoleone.
Napoleone di Buonaparte.
Buonaparte, yeah.
Yeah, it's. I think that is the Italian pronunciation of it.
Well, his family is of Italian origin, after all.
Noble Italian, well, lesser noble Italians.
Minor Tuscan nobles.
Yeah. But yeah, so born Napoleone di Buonaparte.
15th of August 1769.
That's the one. It's a little bit bad.
Yeah. I do have notes here, so.
Yeah. This is the middle of like Napoleon's childhood that's not there for me. This is.
Yeah, it was his early life. As you said, his father, Carlo Maria Bonaparte, was one of those who fought for Corsican independence as part of the nationalist movement under Paoli. Eventually, though, he did settle into the idea of being French and everything like that, and part of France, and it was incorporated as a province into the Kingdom of France in 1770. So
Napoleon had been won there or thereabouts.
There or thereabouts, yeah. And eventually Napoleon's father did come round to being accepted into the French way of life and everything like that.
Yeah. I believe he became a prominent political figure, did he not?
He did. He became the island's representative to Louis XVI's court.
Yeah.
So, and as we said, he was of Italian origin because Corsica was a mix of both Italian and native Corsican.
Yeah.
The Corsican ethnicities, cultures, languages, and such, because Corsican was generally the mother tongue and the official language was Italian.
Yeah.
And it was a long time until French started to overtake Italian.
Well, Napoleon never learned a word of French before he was shipped off to religious school. Catholic school. Never learned a word of French, so he didn't really have to learn French. Nobody was around to speak it or teach him it, really.
Yeah. Well, he was also of the family's fourth child.
Yeah.
And he was their third eldest son, with the others being Joseph, Lucien, Eliza, Louis, Pauline, Caroline, and Jerome.
Yeah.
And he was baptized as a Catholic under the name Napoleone.
Yep.
And he could have been described as other things like Napoleone, Napulio, Napoleone, and Napoleone were some of the other names.
I'm guessing they're sort of like nicknames, shortened names.
Well, it's variations in how it's spelled and everything like that, because nothing was consistent.
No, of course not. I suppose nothing's going to ever be consistent, especially considering he couldn't write. But I also know that he was a little shit when he was a child, to put it bluntly.
Yes.
Apparently he was very boisterous, to put it nicely.
Well, either way, he does later on in memoirs and everything like that, and say interviews and stuff that was written down of his life. He did say that his mother was a very big influence on him, specifically as being a disciplinarian.
Yes.
And basically restraining his more rambunctious, childish
He did used to get in
tendencies.
trouble a lot.
He did used to get in a lot of trouble.
Which is one of the main reasons he was sent to Catholic school.
It was, yes.
And he was sent there very young.
I think it was about 9 years. 9 years old.
I think it was 9. Yes. So it was. I can't remember what it was. What?
It was.
What was the school?
It was a religious school in Autun. It was.
Autun, yeah.
Yeah. But it wasn't long until after he'd moved to the French mainland to enroll in this religious school that he'd transferred to a scholarship at the military academy.
It was Brienne, I believe.
Brienne-le-Château.
I think it was only there for about 5 or 6 months. He was there a very short amount of time, and I believe was it here while he was here that his dad died.
I think it was during his military scholarship.
Because I believe during his military scholarship it was supposed to be a 2-year course.
It was, yes, but he had to do it in 1 year because of the reduced amount of income that he was getting because his father had died.
Yeah. So he had to rush through military academy. But by all accounts of people that were there, he apparently took up the academic side of it very easily. So he found it quite easy to pass through. However, he couldn't write. He could speak fluent French, although they used to get mocked because of his accent.
Yeah, because of his Corsican accent and his his beliefs as a Corsican nationalist.
He was a fervent Corsican nationalist, at least at this point in time, anyway.
Yeah.
And yeah, he never learned to write in French. I don't know for what reasons. He could read, he could speak it, but he couldn't write in French. Never learned to spell.
Well,
so
there you go.
Yeah.
I suppose it just shows that anyone can do anything.
I suppose, yeah. So yeah, he passed out in a year.
And after that, he briefly did intend to become a writer.
Yeah.
And publishing a history of Corsica and what was believed to be a romantic novella, but he didn't prove to be very much of a poet or a writer.
Yeah.
But after completing his studies in about 1784, he was admitted to the École Militaire, which was in Paris.
Yeah. And it was to become an officer.
An artillery officer, to be specific.
Yeah.
And it was here, in fact, that his father died.
Right.
Yeah. So this is where his income was reduced, and thus he wouldn't be able to afford to stay there. So
yeah.
He was forced to complete the 2-year course to become an artillery officer in 1 year, and he did, and he was the first Corsican to actually graduate from there.
Yeah. He was a very specially talented man. He was. Yeah. He just picked things up quickly, and yeah, I suppose. I mean, that's easily said. I mean, he was 13 at the time, maybe not even that, 12.
Yeah, it was something to that effect, I think.
Yeah, he was passing out as an officer at 13, 14.
He was born in 1759, so yeah, it's about 13, 14.
Yeah, so he's a military officer, technically trained military officer, and he'd barely even hit puberty.
Yep, it was 1785 when he graduated, so he'd be about 16?
15, 16, but even still, he's still a young man, he's still...
Yeah. And at 16 I was still working a part-time job.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I was at college working a part-time job.
I was at college as well, whereas Napoleon was commissioned as a second lieutenant in an artillery regiment.
And he was given a command in an artillery regiment, I believe, something Lafair.
Lafair, yeah.
Yeah.
And he served in both Valence and Auxonne until, as we know, the French Revolution came around.
Yeah.
Which was when everybody got a bit choppy with people's heads.
Yeah.
to put it mildly.
But before the French Revolution, though, they all knew exactly how Corsican nationalist Napoleon was.
Yes.
Because he was openly.
He was openly a Corsican nationalist.
Yeah. He didn't hide the fact. He'd like to tell everybody that he'd listen.
Yeah.
Was it here that he started to become a Jacobite, or was it after?
It was during, maybe
Yeah.
a little bit after, but it was unsurprising that after the French Revolution came about, he expressed his ferventness as a Corsican nationalist and asked for leave within his regiment.
I don't think he was asked for leave. I think he was given leave because, he was forced leave because obviously they all knew that tensions were growing and something was going to happen. And I think there was I don't know if a doctrine is the right word, but like orders that were sent out to everybody that's not French royalist needs to be sent away, essentially.
Okay.
Because
interesting.
They didn't want, I suppose, like corruption and like desertion and stuff like that, knowing that these people are then going to probably have to fight civilians that they're sympathetic with. So if they're not there, they can't not follow orders. I think that was the reasoning behind it. I don't think he asked. I think he happily took it.
Well, because he was going to leave to join the Corsican nationalist movement, so of course he would have been happy. But
Yeah. Well, yeah. So he moved back to Corsica, and this is where it all started for him. Really, this is where Napoleon started his rise, essentially. Up until now, he's been like academically gifted, but he's led a pretty mediocre sort of. Not much has happened.
The life pretty much expected of a low-level officer.
Yeah, he's not really done anything of note. He's just happy to be where he's from at this point, and they've sent him back to go where he's from. Brexit.
You had to go there, didn't you? You had to go there.
It was easily made, you can't help it.
I suppose so. Either way, he was sent back to. Well, he went back to Corsica. Shush. he went back to Corsica.
Yep.
And tried to join the nationalist movement again, especially since Pasquale Paoli, the famed Corsican nationalist, had been released and allowed to go back to Corsica by the National Assembly, which had taken power in Paris at this point. But Paoli pretty much dismissed Napoleon on the spot, considering his father a traitor.
Yeah, which I both understand and don't at the same time.
I mean, Napoleon pretty much considered his father a traitor for embracing the French way of life.
But that's what I mean. That's why I consider it being on both sides of the fence, because he was a Corsican nationalist who rebelled against the French, and technically, yes, by that standard, he is a traitor. But then he can't be, because his overlords are then the French. Yeah, and there's not much he can do at that point.
But I mean, it was at this point, after his dismissal by Paoli, and during the complex three-way fight, pretty much on Corsica between the French royalists, the French revolutionaries, or the Jacobites, or what have you, and the Corsican nationalists. It was here that he embraced the revolution. Yeah, and it was here that he became a supporter of the Jacobins.
Yeah, I believe he was given command of a battalion of volunteers, Corsican National Volunteers.
Yes. It was also here that he was promoted to captain. Yeah, but technically with him being part of I can't remember what rank it was, but because infantry and artillery ranks were slightly different, I believe he was technically promoted as commander of this nationalist. I think I might have It was technically promoted because of the nature of what his command was. I think he was a second lieutenant as a officer still, a French officer, but as a Corsican volunteer, I believe he was the major or captain or something. And it was only in 1792 when this happened. Yeah. So he was only 23.
Yeah. So he had his own command of a battalion of Corsican volunteers, which
Mhm.
is what kick-started it, really.
Mhm.
They were quite loyal to it. Yeah.
It was also at this point that things got even more complicated during the three-way scuffle between the Corsican nationalists, the French, the Corsican Republicans, and the French Royalists. That it was where Corsica declared formal secession from France and requested protection from the British.
Yeah.
When it sort of kind of became a colony, but also sort of didn't, as a
Didn't
British protectorate.
Howley want Great Britain to take Corsica?
It was Paoli that had requested
Yeah,
the
sort of brokered a
the
treaty
protection
essentially.
for the British government.
Yeah. But again, he was the one calling Napoleon's father a traitor.
Mm.
So the double standards on just most historical facts of people are just here.
Yeah.
They say one thing and do another. But it's a story of history, I suppose.
Yeah, it was at this point as well that Bonaparte and his family being pretty much well, very unwelcome.
Yeah.
In Corsica at this point. They were forced to flee to
I
Toulon.
think it's because he was outspoken about Paoli. I think he became quite outspoken about Paoli and his opposition to Paoli and his views. And I think his family were getting some death threats or along those lines.
Something to that effect.
I think he sent his family away first. I believe his family was sent to the mainland.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how.
It was about in 1793 that this happened.
Yeah. So. Yeah, because there was also a riot, I believe. Was that in '92?
That was about in 1792.
Yeah, there was a riot that I believe Napoleon instigated against French soldiers. Yeah, using those volunteers. Yeah. So, did they know Napoleon was behind that?
I'm not too sure, but either way, he wasn't particularly welcome there anymore.
No, of course
so
not.
he was forced to flee.
Yeah.
And so he fled to Toulon, and this is right about the time that he stops referring to himself as Napoleonic Bonaparte.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's official, but he started calling himself Napoleon Bonaparte now.
Yeah, it was around this time that he started doing that. But his family themselves did not drop the name Bonaparte until about 1796.
Yeah.
And he first signed his name as Napoleon Bonaparte in that year.
Yeah,
about 27.
Yeah. Well, he couldn't write, so I guess that's probably why.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I suppose he just dropped Corsica entirely at this point. I suppose if Corsica don't want me, I don't want it.
No.
That's sort of the mindset, I suppose.
Either way, back to about 1793.
Yeah.
It was at this time that he really started to get in with the Jacobin movement and the revolution and everything like that, publishing Republican pamphlets and gaining the support specifically of Augustin Robespierre,
Yes.
the younger brother of
Maximilian.
Mr. Choppy Man himself,
Yeah.
Maximilian Robespierre.
Yeah. I believe Salizetti was there as well, was he not?
Yes, he was.
Yeah. I believe he was essentially Napoleon's closest advisor.
One of his closest advisors, yeah. And it was at this point as well, because of his work for the revolution, he was appointed the artillery commander of the Republican forces that had arrived in Toulon.
Yeah.
On the 8th of September, in response to the British trying to land forces there and take the port.
Yeah.
Specifically, he prevented that by capturing a hill just outside of the city, where the guns could pretty much rain down hell on the British forces that were trying to seize the city and trying to land there, and as such pretty much forced them to evacuate.
Yeah. So it stopped them from bringing in, like you say, reinforcements, and because they were technically outnumbered.
Yeah.
But that was including the British Navy trying to come in.
Mm-hmm.
So once that was stopped through Napoleon's strategy, which he was only in charge of the guns at the time, he wasn't in charge of the army.
Mm-hmm.
So this was his decision on just the guns. And I believe at the time as well, the commander didn't like his idea, was quite against it, but was sort of like, okay, we'll try it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it worked, it worked. It ended up winning the siege essentially.
And it was this moment. Sorry about that. It was this moment, the siege of Toulon.
Yeah.
And preventing the capture of it by the British, that caught the attention of the Committee of Public Safety, which was the body that was running France at this moment, headed by Robespierre.
Yep.
And it was this that got him put in charge of the artillery of France's Army of Italy.
Yes.
Which was one of the many armies that was organised as part of their War of the First Coalition, which was broken out shortly after the French Revolution.
Yeah.
And it was also at this point that he got promoted from colonel and then to brigadier general by the age of 24, as he was on his way to his new post at Nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it was 24. Yeah.
Only 24.
I believe then we're on to 1795 now.
About 1795.
Yeah.
Because it was at this point that the army carried out the plan to attack the Kingdom of Sardinia.
Yes. I believe it was that was the army in the west.
It was still part of the Army of Italy.
Yeah.
It wasn't the Army of the West just yet.
Right. Yeah. Is this the where we won in like 2 weeks?
Yeah, it was after like the Battle of Saggio, I believe that's how you say it. Italian.
Yeah.
Saggio in
about
1794, and then sieged Ormea, and then outflanked the Austrians and the Sardinians that were trying to.
Yeah, that was I believe that was one of the famous battles. I believe
one of the famous battles.
I believe this was like one of the first indications of Napoleon's larger strategy, mastermind,
his military genius, pretty much.
Because up until this point, he'd had glimpses, like I said, the Toulouse where he was on the hill with the guns, but he's not had the opportunity to done this on a larger scale up until now. And the first time he was able to show it properly, it worked to perfection. It worked to perfection. So, like you said, it just rising and rising was his stop.
If it worked, it worked.
It worked. It worked.
And it was also at this point that he was sent on a mission by Augustin Robespierre to the Republic of Genoa to basically determine their intentions towards France. Well, that was.
Yeah.
And it was also at this point that he was alleged to have been put under house arrest in Nice.
I
say alleged.
Yeah, I don't think that was true. I think that was people like French royalists that were trying to downplay Napoleon, essentially trying to say, "Oh, look, he's not willing to do things. He's scared."
Yeah. But this was apparently it was because of his association with the Robespierres after they got overthrown.
Yeah.
After they got overthrown, with the choppy man getting his head chopped off.
For some reason, his brother as well, his younger brother, the one that was with Napoleon, decided to give himself up as well. I believe, obviously there was Max, and what was it, Robert? Augustine, that's the one. I believe when they all got caught, Augustine was left, and he decided to hand himself in. For reasons.
Well, I assume he probably just knew that they were doomed.
No, he was not part of any plans. Like by what all readings, that nobody even had a clue he was that far into it, so wouldn't have been involved. And then when it was me too. Oh, okay. Don't question it.
Fair enough.
One less.
Yeah. Well, either way, his secretary disputed those claims in his memoirs, and
yeah,
it was like something between like differing armies within the Republican structure.
Yeah.
And apparently at that point he was acquitted of any wrongdoing because of this association with the Robespierres.
Yeah.
And was released within 2 weeks. And it was at this point as well that he drew up plans to attack Italian positions in the context of France's war with Austria, which was still going on. The war of the First Coalition. This was.
Yeah.
It was also at this point he unsuccessfully launched a expedition to retake Corsica.
Yeah.
Which was still under British protection at this point, but his expedition. There we go. Mine's running a bit slow.
Yeah.
Was
it's been a long time.
Was repulsed for the Royal Navy.
We're getting back into it.
Yeah. We are looking at our notes a lot, so they are doing a lot of the heavy lifting.
Like I said, with it being so long since we've recorded, then you've got to get your brain back into it.
Yeah, pretty much.
As of next episode, I think we'll be fine. I think we'll be back into it. Hopefully more often, back to weekly. Yeah, and hopefully with the videos as well, YouTube might be a little bit better for us, because Spotify's going okay. Obviously, if you're watching it on YouTube, listen to it on Spotify as well. Just get the views. But the setup will get better. It's just with it being the first one and everything like that, we're just seeing how it goes, making sure it's working, and then it'll be better quality soon enough.
Fair enough. It's all we can really do.
Yeah. So back to Napoleon.
Yes.
So where are we up to now?
We're up to about 1794 still.
Yeah.
And it was at this point that he started a romantic relationship.
Yes.
With Desiree Clary, I believe her name was.
Yeah, and I believe it was the sister of his older brother's wife.
Yes, it was.
Which is a weird situation.
Yes, it was the. Julie Clary, her sister.
Yeah.
Had married Napoleon's older brother Joseph.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how that would even work. Like that's not for me to understand, because at some point that's going to be incest.
And it's at this point we get to 1795.
Yeah. With
Napoleon being assigned to the Army of the West, and the war in the Vendée, which was a civil war and a royalist counter-revolution.
Yeah.
Which planned to bring back the royalist system.
Yeah. Was this when they attacked the palace? No, this was before that.
Yeah, he was still he was still an artillery general at this point, and it was pretty much here after a move to the Bureau of Topography for the Committee of Public Safety.
Was this where they offered him the command?
I think it was.
Yeah, I think apparently he was offered the command of the army, but because it was again with the infantry and artillery,
it was technically a demotion.
And I think, was it poor health? He tried to claim poor health, but he
avoided the posting pretty much.
Yeah, so he never ended up going and taking command. He was just.
And after that, he tried to move around several times. And as I said, the Bureau of Topography, he went to tried to unsuccessfully transfer to the military attaché to Constantinople.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he also wrote another. He wrote another romantic novella, Clisson et Eugénie, I believe it was called.
It was never a writer, bless him. I mean, he did in later when he became the emperor and such, and he was writing newspapers for his soldiers, but other than that, he hasn't really had any accomplishment in writing.
Yes, but for refusing to serve in the Vendée campaign, he was removed from the list of generals in regular service, and he pretty much caused very bad financial situation for him.
Yeah, so basically he stopped getting paid because he refused to
He stopped
work.
getting paid his general's salary.
Yeah.
So he was pretty much broke.
Yeah. And I believe it's around about now that the rebellion was the first one, the Royalist Rebellion.
Yes, the Royalist Rebellion in October.
Yeah. And I can't remember the name of the person in charge, but he gave Napoleon command of the artillery.
That was Paul Barras. It was.
Yes.
He was the leader of what was known as the how do you say that? Thermidorian reaction.
Right. Yeah.
Which was the movement which overthrew the Robespierres and tried to bring back some stability.
Yeah.
To the country, and it was him that gave command of the army. Of the army, was it?
I think it was just the artillery, I believe.
Just like some improvised forces.
Yeah. I think he was given command of a small force, and Napoleon seized some large weapons from elsewhere. I don't think anybody really knows, because apparently during the first riots in Paris when he was younger, he was there, and I think he noticed that when that happened, that the artillery was a major force. Like, it could be the difference between winning and losing his artillery.
Yeah, he basically saw the massacre that had happened to the King's Swiss Guard.
Yes, the Swiss Guard. That's
and realised as a result that artillery would be the key to the defence of the Tuileries Palace, which he was tasked with guarding.
Yes, and it was very much so. I think it was 2 days it lasted. Did this? Technically, it was called a siege, I believe, but it really wasn't. I believe it took 2 days, and there was about 1,400 people that died.
Yeah.
So it caused. So it took him 2 days to kill 1,400 people, and that was solely because of this artillery that he'd managed to scrounge up from somewhere. And he knew how to use artillery, obviously with him being trained and an officer.
With him being a former artillery general.
And he used it to full effect. And he quashed a rebellion in 2 days.
And it was at this point that he became a household name, pretty much.
Yeah.
With him gaining fame, wealth, the patronage of the new government, the directory, the cavalry officer that was under him that seized the cannons, which helped to repel this royalist counter-revolution. Joachim Murat is infamous cavalry officer, married one of his sisters, and also served as one of Bonaparte's generals, and he was promoted to commander of the interior. Yeah,
essentially the Mark Antony to Julius Caesar.
Essentially, yeah. And again was given command of the army of Italy. He wasn't just part of it this time.
Yeah. And this is where he really started rising. This is the real kick-off of Napoleon becoming the emperor. This is where it starts.
And with him being, in charge of the army of Italy this time, being given command of the army,
the entire army of Italy,
the entire army, not just like the artillery bit of it anymore.
Yeah.
He was. This was where he would get to show off his military genius.
Yeah. Very much so.
And it was also at this point that he became romantically involved again. Not with Desiree Clary this time, but with his most infamous romantic involvement, Josephine.
Yeah. Yes.
Specifically, she was a former mistress of Barras before they got married.
Yeah.
And 2 weeks after that marriage, he didn't even get like a honeymoon or what have you.
No, he was gone.
He left Paris
Yeah.
to take control of the army.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah, so it was gone. It was out of there. I mean, he didn't really have a choice.
No.
If you're the commander of an army, you can't really get out of that due to poor health.
No.
So, yeah, and like I said, this is where
This was his first string of overwhelming victories in the Monte campaign.
Yes.
Against the Kingdom of Sardinia and the Austrians again.
The Habsburg dynasty, I believe.
The Habsburgs, yes.
Yes.
And he'd knocked Piedmont out of the war within 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think it was
so
18
successful.
days. I think he had 7 quick successive victories in about 18 days. And it was all through sheer tactical genius.
Yeah.
Whenever one of them would attack, he'd counter-attack in the perfect place, he'd split them apart, have them running, but running in a way that, like away from each other to split the armies apart.
Pretty much.
It was perfect.
And it was at this point that the war became more protracted as the struggle for Mantua broke out. And this was where the Austrians, no matter what they did in terms of offensive efforts, Napoleon was just pushing them back and back and back, defeating every single relief force they had. They were winning battles in places such as Castiglione, Bassano, Arcole, Rivoli, and the decisive victory at Rivoli especially led to the collapse of the Austrian position in Italy, and they pretty much had to withdraw completely from Italy.
Yeah.
Because the Austrians lost about 14,000 men, and in comparison to the French's 5,000.
Yeah, that was sort of the story of Napoleon, was he knew how to trade off casualties very well. So he'd always take at least 2 for every one or 3 for every one.
Yeah.
And that was essentially what won him so much support from his troops and just from everybody really. Yeah.
And at this point, the next phase of the invasion was for the French to invade the Habsburg heartlands, so going into southern Germany and the Austrian heartlands specifically, where they had been defeated before in 1796 by Archduke Charles.
Yeah.
But he had since withdrawn his troops to move to Vienna to protect Vienna.
Yes.
And after learning of Bonaparte's assault into the Austrian heartlands, and in the first encounter between the two, Bonaparte pushed Charles back further and further and further, and advanced so deep into Austrian territory after winning another battle at Tarvis, and he got all the way to Leoben, I believe it was, which was only like 100 kilometers from Vienna, and it was at this point that they just cut it off and sued for peace.
Yes.
Because they could see what was happening. They were just like, oh shit.
Yes, we're losing.
This man is like almost within artillery distance of Vienna.
Yeah.
He could destroy us.
And he would have done
what
as
we
well.
still can. Yeah, he would have done.
He wouldn't have held back, and he, like I say, knew how to use his artillery to full effect, so he would have done a very good job with it.
And it was the subsequent treaties of Leoben and the more comprehensive Treaty of Campo Formio that gave France control of much of northern Italy and the Low Countries. So like what's now modern day Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands.
Yes.
And a secret clause in that which promised Venice to Austria.
Yeah.
However, Bonaparte marched on Venice and forced its surrender for this secret clause to take effect, ending almost over 1,000 years of Venice being independent.
Yeah.
And it was at that point that the French, under his authorization, looted treasures such as like the horses of Saint Mark.
Yes.
Which were like treasured treasured artifacts from Venetian history.
This is what essentially made Napoleon the emperor. It was at this point that he was riding on such a high that he could only go higher from there. And then the fact that when these armies had looted Italy, he just had so much power, influence, money, everything, that essentially everybody in France was just relying on him.
The entirety of the campaign, Napoleon's army captured like 150,000 prisoners, like over 500 cannons, and like almost 200 standards from the various regiments and what have you that he would have defeated. And his armies had fought within 67 different actions, won 18 battles, all through his own like military genius and superior tactics.
Yeah. Like you say, this is the first glimpse we got of the military genius that was Napoleon. And it'll only got to get better from here.
Essentially.
This is, I believe, once he'd finished looting Italy, he'd sent, what was his name? He'd sent somebody back to Paris to start the.
There we are. Pierre something. Augereau, I believe that's how you say that.
Pierre Augereau, General Augereau, to start laying
the groundwork for the coup of putting him in power.
Yeah.
It was also at this point that he founded those newspapers that you said about.
Yes.
The one for his troops and one for circulation back in France.
Yeah. And like you say, but with him being Jacobin, he sent the general back to basically rile up the Jacobin leaders that were in Paris at the time, and essentially like, come on, we need to fight, we need to win, we need to blah blah blah, and then it happened. It kicked off. And
whilst the royalists that Augereau had purged in this coup had left Barat and his Republican allies in charge, they were pretty much at the mercy of Napoleon.
Yes.
Because he was the one that put them in power, so they were at his mercy.
They relied on Napoleon for everything.
Yep.
He had them under the thumb with a little finger.
Yeah.
He wasn't even trying.
I mean, it was also at this point that he was becoming, increasingly influential in politics.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't the people in Paris that negotiated the surrender of Austria. It was Napoleon himself that negotiated that surrender. And subsequently, he returned to Paris as a hero in 1797.
Yeah.
And he met the foreign minister, Talleyrand.
Yeah.
Who would end up serving under Napoleon during his reign.
Yeah. He's not quite the emperor yet.
Not quite the emperor.
He's everything but the name at this point. He's an emperor in everything but name.
Yeah. And it was also after this that he began his invasion of Egypt.
Yeah.
Or his expedition to Egypt.
Yes. And this is where my knowledge really dips away. Yeah, I know barely anything about the Egypt campaign, and I'm just aware that he had to abandon the army. That's my extent of the Egypt.
Yeah, it was. He decided on Egypt after a couple of months of planning with Talleyrand, after they had prepared to invade Britain. Yeah. And he decided instead against Egypt because he decided that and it was pretty much clear that France's naval strength was not enough to go against the Royal Navy. The Royal Navy was still the most powerful navy in the world. I mean, Britannia rules the waves for a reason. Yeah. And it was at that point he wanted to establish a French presence in the Middle East. Yeah. And join forces with Tipu Sultan, I believe he was called, the Sultan of Mysore, and he was an enemy of the British. Right. And it was specifically to undermine Britain's
presence.
in the Middle East and its trade interests to India,
Of course.
especially.
Yeah.
Especially the trade interests
India's a
with
big
India.
thing for Britain.
And he had assured the people in charge, the Directory, that as soon as he had conquered Egypt, he would establish relations with the Indian princes and pretty much kick the British out of India.
One of the reasons this was so significant for Britain, though, is that just essentially within the middle or just lost the American colonies.
Mm-hmm.
So India was the last big outside source that they had of like income, like trade goods, and like just like somewhere they controlled part of the empire. It was one of the last big things they had.
Yeah.
So they were going to hold on to this for what they was worth.
Pretty much.
And it upset them.
Yeah.
I know that, it upset them.
And after Napoleon's convincing, the Directory did authorise them to secure a trade route to the Indian subcontinent.
Yeah.
It was also at this point that he was elected a member of the French Academy of Sciences. Okay. Don't know how that's...
He probably just asked, and they were like, yes, Napoleon.
the expedition wasn't just troops, it was also, scientists, mathematicians, naturalists, chemists, and, all sorts of people, historians, archaeologists, etc., etc., etc.
Okay.
And discoveries there included things like the Rosetta Stone, and the work that was published in the Description d'Egypte, I believe it was called. French.
Yeah.
In 1809.
Yeah.
And it was at this point, also en route to Egypt, I should note, that he reached Malta, which was still at that point controlled by the Knights Hospitaller.
Right. Okay.
And the Grand Master there, Ferdinand von Hompesch-Zubolheim, I believe it was called.
Italian, probably.
No, that's German.
Is it? Is it? It sounded a bit Italian.
I mean, I thought you would have thought it was German from von.
Oh, von. I thought you said bon. Sorry.
No, von.
I thought you said bon.
So Ferdinand von Hompesch-Zubolheim.
Right. Yeah.
And he'd surrendered after a little bit of resistance, and Bonaparte had captured an important naval base there, so pretty much act as a launching point to Egypt after only losing 3 men during the siege of Malta.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was at this point his expedition pretty much ran rings around the Royal Navy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Eluding them at every opportunity, and he landed in Alexandria.
Yep.
And
Egypt.
Yeah. In Alexandria, Egypt. Yeah. Yes, not Alexandria, Greece, or Turkey, or anywhere else.
Or any of the other ones.
Or any of the other Alexandrias, because
we changed the names because there was too many of them.
Alexander the Great would be.
He was a very vain child.
He would also be his own episode entirely.
Yes, definitely.
And it was at this point upon landing in Alexandria, he fought the Battle of Shubrikit.
Okay.
Against what was the Mamluks then, or what remained of the Mamluks that were in control of Egypt, as probably a client of the Ottomans.
Yeah.
And it was here that his forces pretty much were pound for pound equalled with the Mamluk cavalry.
Yeah.
And only 29 of his soldiers were killed in that battle.
Yep. With
approximately 2,000 Egyptians being killed.
I'm guessing that was another victory for the artillery.
Yep, pretty much.
Yeah, he used the artillery in such perfect ways that he could carry out victories like that.
But it was at this point that the expedition started to fall apart after the British fleet under Horatio Nelson, Lord Nelson himself, only a knight at this point, so Sir Horatio Nelson, captured or destroyed all but 2 ships in the French fleet in the Battle of the Nile. So that pretty much prevented any of his forces or any of the expedition from escaping.
Yeah.
And it prevented Napoleon from strengthening his position there. His army had succeeded in a temporary increase in French power in Egypt, but they faced uprising after uprising after uprising because, of course, the Egyptians didn't want them there.
Yeah.
And
the Egyptians are a prickly bunch.
At that point, it was when he moved an army into the Ottoman province of Damascus, which was modern-day Syria and the area known as Galilee.
Yeah.
And he had led these 13,000 soldiers in conquests of coastal towns on Arish, Gaza, Jaffa, and Haifa, which were basically all along the coast of the Levant. And the attack on Jaffa in particular was particularly brutal.
Yeah.
And many of the defenders themselves were former prisoners of war, even. And they had ordered the garrison there, particularly at Haifa, of like 1,500 to 5,000 prisoners to be executed.
All right. Okay.
So quite brutal, especially by bayonet or worse, by drowning.
Yeah.
Which was awful.
Yeah. Because the bayonet's not a quick death.
Yeah. No. The French then pretty much robbed and murdered pretty much everyone they could.
Yeah.
In Haifa for 3 whole days. So 3 whole days of mass looting, especially back then.
Yeah, especially for something as coordinated as the French army as well.
Yeah. And he began with an army of around 13,000 men for this attack into Damascus.
Yeah.
And it reported about 1,500 missing, 1,200 died in combat, and thousands upon thousands died from the bubonic plague.
Yeah.
And after that, he suffered one of his first defeats, actually, because he failed to take the fortress at Acre, and so he retreated back to Egypt, or withdrew back to Egypt.
Right.
And of all things as well, it was another bit of brutality on behalf of Bonaparte, because some men were still plague stricken, because the plague tended to kill slowly.
Yeah.
So there were still men that were dragging along, a bit sick, clearly dying.
Yeah.
And so Napoleon had ordered those men to be poisoned with opium in order to speed up the retreat, so they could get back to Egypt.
Well, it's a fun way to go.
But then he bounced back with another victory, in this case defeating an Ottoman amphibious invasion of Abukir, I believe it was called.
Okay.
And after that, well, whilst he was in Egypt, he did stay informed with European affairs.
Yeah.
And France had, at this point, suffered a series of defeats in the War of the Second Coalition. And taking advantage of a gap in the British lines in the fleet, he got back to France.
Yeah, I believe he left most of the army.
He pretty much abandoned everybody else.
Yeah. Which, say what you will, but
I can just imagine it now. So you're not abandoning us, right? No, I'm going to stay with you to the end. Hey, what's that over there? And ran away.
That sounds like a horrible history sketch, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I was just watching a couple episodes last week, actually.
Yeah.
It came up on my recommended. I was like, yes.
You can just imagine it, just him paddling away as fast as he could. Oh dear.
Oh.
And it was at this point in 1799, fearing that his republic's future was in doubt.
Yeah.
And after getting back to Paris, despite receiving no explicit orders to return to Paris,
yeah,
the army that was left in Egypt was left in charge of Jean-Baptiste Kleber, I believe it was, and unbeknownst to Bonaparte, despite remaining as informed as he was, the Directory had actually sent him orders to return to France, actually to ward off possible invasions of French soil.
Right.
I almost said infringements then. It just.
Yeah.
But, poor lines of communication prevented delivery of these messages because, getting messages from Paris to Egypt took a long time.
Yeah, the telephone wasn't exactly.
The telephone wasn't a thing, so it basically resulted in a messenger having to go as fast as he could. And considering that the British fleet was pretty much besieging Egypt at this point,
they
wouldn't have been able to get through.
Yeah.
And so, unbeknownst to him, he had returned to Paris to just kind of like brush that whole thing of Egypt under the carpet.
Yeah.
And then he returned as a hero again.
Yeah.
So at that point he failed upwards.
Yeah, I think it was just that idea of
a task failed successfully.
Yeah, we still really need Napoleon. Let's just sort of forget about that. Hi, Napoleon.
Yeah.
It was just sort of.
But by the time he had got back to Paris in about October of that year, the situation had been drastically improved with a series of victories.
Yeah.
But the Republic itself, the government, was pretty much bankrupt, and the Directory was unpopular, and it was looking like another revolution was on the way.
Yeah.
Excuse me. They had discussed his desertion because he had pretty much abandoned his troops.
Yeah.
And they were just like, hey Napoleon, what are you doing here? But also, where are your troops? Fighting.
Yeah.
Fighting. Yeah. But they basically couldn't do anything because they were just too weak to do anything.
Yeah.
And as I said, despite the failures in Egypt, he was welcomed as a hero.
Yep.
So.
The French were as connected as they've been in a long time at this point. It was as stable as it was going to be, at the very least. Anyway.
Yeah.
So they didn't want to break that status quo again, to be honest.
Despite the fact that the government was unpopular, the country was bankrupt, and so on and so on.
The country's always bankrupt.
I mean, it was at this point as well that he overthrew the government after an alliance with people like Talleyrand and members of the Council of 500, such as Emmanuel Joseph Saïs, his brother Lucien, who was the president of the lower house at this point, Roger Ducos and Joseph Fouché, I believe that's how you say that. And on the 9th of November 1799, they overthrew the Directory.
Yeah.
Closing down the Council of 500 as well. And after that, within like a month, he was first consul with the other two consuls as well. This is where the consulship became a thing.
Yeah.
And he became first consul for about 10 years, with his two other consuls being, his close allies.
This is sounding eerily similar to a certain Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, his power had been confirmed by the new constitution that had been drafted.
Yeah.
Originally devised by Saïs to give Napoleon a minor role, but Napoleon had just changed some things, edited some clauses,
it's sounding
and
similar.
had it accepted by direct popular vote.
Yeah.
With 3 million in favour and about 1,500 people opposing. Although they probably went around for very much longer.
Yeah, I don't think you get much of a choice when 3 million people decide that it's a good idea.
The consulate was established, and it was still a republic, but it pretty much a dictatorship at this point.
Yeah.
And after the establishment of the consulship, he established a political system called dictatorship by plebiscites.
Right.
And a bit worried, obviously, by the democratic forces that had been unleashed by the revolution.
Yeah.
With people like demanding more, everything like that. but unwilling to ignore them entirely, because he still somewhat sympathised with the Republican ideals and the ideals of the revolution.
Yeah.
He restored regular electoral consultations with the French people, on his road to imperial power.
Yeah.
And as I said, he had a hand in drafting the new constitution and secured his own election, as I said, as first consul, taking up residence at the Tuileries Palace in Paris. And the constitution was approved, as I said, pretty much a rigged plebiscite.
Yeah.
With 99.94% officially listed as voting yes.
94%, specifically the 9-4, I think.
Yeah, it's just like
yeah.
It's almost like those North Korean elections.
I don't know what you're talking about. We love North Korea.
No,
they might be listening. Well, there's webcam on now. They might be listening. China, yeah, all of those.
Yeah. Bing chilling and such. That was terrible. I'm sorry.
It's them you need to apologise to, not me.
Look at them. I've barely been looking at the camera anyway.
I can't.
Oh dear.
I can't.
Anyway, Napoleon's brother, as I said, Lucien, who was the president of the lower house at this point,
yeah,
when the director was still a thing, had showed that 3 million people had participated in the plebiscite. The real number was about 1.5 million, and political observers at the time assumed that, eligible people to vote was about 5 million.
Yeah.
And so they basically just bumped the numbers to make the consulate seem more popular.
Yeah.
And despite the fact that it was voted for by a plebiscite and everything like that, his grip on power was still not very secure. It was still very tenuous at best, because Europe was still engulfed in all these wars and everything like that with France.
Yeah.
And it was in the spring of 1800 that his troops again crossed into Italy.
Yeah.
Via the Swiss Alps, where that painting comes from. That painting of him on a horse.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Even though the fact that it wasn't a horse, it was a mule, but let's get past that, because we need to make Napoleon look good.
Artistic liberties.
Yeah, artistic liberties, that's it. His troops had crossed into the Swiss Alps at that point, aiming to surprise Austrian armies that had crossed into Italy.
Yeah.
And had reoccupied the peninsula during the turmoil, during the constant coups and everything like that.
Yeah.
When Bonaparte was still in Egypt. So basically all of Napoleon's work that had been undertaken while he was still in command had pretty much been undone as soon as he went to Egypt.
Which they saw an opportunity and took it.
Yeah,
so
and
it was his own fault.
And they had pulled the wool over their eyes so much that the French army entering Italy was pretty much unopposed.
Yeah.
As they went into northern Italy.
Yep.
And the Austrians were pretty much busy in Genoa, which was being sieged at that point by a very big force.
Yeah.
This was under Andre Massena, I believe it was. Pretty much did all he could to give the northern force time to carry out their operations.
Yeah.
And after spending several days, trying to basically playing cat and mouse with each other, trying to face each other.
Yeah.
They did finally clash at the Battle of Marengo, 14th of June, where General Melas on the Austrian side had the numerical advantage, fielding about 30,000 troops in comparison to Bonaparte's 24,000. So not that much of a difference, but enough to
make a difference.
Enough to, to say that they're outnumbered.
Yeah.
And the battle began favourably for the Austrians at first, with their initial attack surprising the French and driving them back a little bit.
Yeah.
And Melas thought that he had won the battle after that, and retired to his quarters around.
Did he know who was fighting?
3 p.m, leaving his subordinates in charge. And then the French lines in their tactical retreat, of course, never broke.
Yeah.
And Napoleon, at this point, was constantly riding out with his troops, just to keep them fighting. And so it got a good image in their heads of, Napoleon being on the front lines with them, leading the army.
Well, he'd always done that since the beginning. He always had that.
He was always right in the front.
Yeah. If I won't do it myself, I won't ask somebody else to do it. Essentially, it was. I think the Americans have like a code in their officers training school. It's basically in the sense of follow me.
Yeah.
I think the words are follow me, and it's like do what I do.
Don't do it. I wouldn't get you to do anything that I wouldn't do myself.
Yeah. Which is definitely Napoleon's mantra.
And as before, his command over artillery was very competent, and the barrages from the artillery and charges from cavalry had pretty much decimated the Austrian army after what was his name again? Desaix. There it was.
Yeah.
And they pretty much decimated the Austrian army, which fled over the Bormida River back to Alessandria,
right,
leaving about 14,000 casualties. So that army had pretty much been cut in half.
Yeah.
And the following day, the Austrians once again abandoned Italy.
Thought they learned the lesson the first time.
After a convention had been called, which gave them safe passage to friendly soil.
Yeah.
In exchange for the fortresses that they were holding at that point.
Yeah.
And although Napoleon had been blamed for some tactical mistakes during the battle, they also praised the fact that he undertook a risky campaign against a force that outnumbered him and still won.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also invading the Italian peninsula from the north, through the Swiss Alps.
Yeah.
That was.
It's not an easy thing.
That's not an easy thing, considering mountains.
And the French aren't exactly known as mountain soldiers.
Mountain
it's more of a German thing, is that?
That's more of a German thing, yes.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that also as well the vast majority of French invasions into the Italian peninsula, of course, came from the west rather than the north, or nearer along the coastline, pretty much.
Yeah.
Where the Swiss Alps were pretty much cut off, and he'd spent an entire year pretty much getting the Austrians to get out of Italy.
Yeah.
And it only took him about a month to achieve the same goal. It was very
yeah. Talk about blitzkrieg.
Yeah. Speaking of that more, the German strategist and field marshal Alfred von Schlieffen, the pioneer of the Schlieffen Plan in World War I, concluded that, quote, Bonaparte did not annihilate his enemy, but eliminated him and rendered him harmless.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
So they
he wasn't without mercy, was Napoleon. He never wiped anybody out as such.
I mean, as evidenced by the Convention of Alessandria, which let them flee.
Yeah.
Which allowed them to, flee northern Italy in exchange for the fortresses that they were holding and such.
Yeah.
And his triumph there had secured his political authority and boosted his popularity back home.
Yeah.
So, that pretty much secured his power. That was still quite tenuous at this point.
Yeah.
But even though it was a crushing victory for the French, again, it still wasn't an immediate peace because, you know, the British were still involved and they pretty much hated everything French. And while the Austrians were beaten, you know, they were still licking their wounds and everything like that, so they weren't out of it just yet.
Yeah.
And it was Bonaparte's brother, actually, his older brother Joseph, that led the complex negotiations in Luneville.
Okay.
And it reported back to Napoleon that Austria, with British backing, would not acknowledge the new territory that France had acquired, which was quite bold.
Yeah.
Considering how easily and completely they had been defeated. But as negotiations became, like, you know, increasingly fractious and tenuous and everything like that, so people weren't you weren't accepting this, you were accepting this, blah 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 blah. It was Napoleon gave orders to General Moreau, to strike Austria again.
Yeah.
And Moreau and his armies had pretty much swept through Bavaria.
Yeah.
And secured an overwhelming victory, specifically at Hohenlinden.
All right.
And as a result, again, the Austrians capitulated and signed the treaty.
Yeah.
Because, you know,
it's becoming a thing.
There's only so many times you can be defeated before you just sign the treaty.
Yeah. It's becoming a bit of a trend.
And it was at this point that it had a lasting bit of peace.
Yeah.
Because the continent had pretty much been plagued with war with France for excuse me,
France being the dominant power
for nearly a decade.
France was the dominant power in Europe by quite some margin.
Well, besides Britain, but
yeah, but I suppose European
mainland Europe. Yeah, okay, fair enough. And, you know, after that decade of constant warfare, the France and Britain finally came to an agreement on peace, the Treaty of Amiens in 1802, you know, bringing the Revolutionary Wars to an end.
Yeah.
And after that, it was the start of the Napoleonic Wars.
Yeah. Which will be an episode themselves as well.
Yeah. And Amiens themselves called for the withdrawal of British forces from recently conquered colonial territories that had been conquered from other places.
Yeah.
As well as assurances for containing the expansionary goals of the French Republic.
Yeah.
And while Europe was at peace, the economy was recovering, and it was at this point that during his peacetime governance of France, his popularity absolutely skyrocketed.
Yeah.
And it soared to its highest levels under the consulate.
Yep.
And a new plebiscite again came out in 1802. The French Republic came out in huge numbers to approve another constitution. That made the consulate permanent.
Yeah.
And essentially elevated Bonaparte to dictator for life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I will point out the similarities with Hitler.
Yeah.
They're there.
I mean, the plebiscite 2 years earlier that I've mentioned, it was a bit rigged, whereas this one enticed like 3.6 million people to go this time. About 72% of people who could vote at that point in France.
Yeah. And
no secret ballot this time in 1802, and only a few people openly defied the regime.
Yeah.
And the new constitution that they had passed gained approval with over 99%. Again.
Yeah.
Yeah. With broad powers that were spelled out in Article 1, with French people name, and the Senate proclaims Napoleon Bonaparte first consul for life, specifically.
Yeah.
So it was there, pretty much in writing, in the first article. You are in charge. You are dictator for life.
Yeah.
And it was at this point he was generally referred to as well as Napoleon rather than Bonaparte.
Yeah. Yeah. I think his French given name now is Napoleon. I think they dropped the Bonaparte section for most things.
Yeah. And it was after this that it involved like the brief period of peace allowed them to focus on the French colonies abroad, such as Saint Domingue, which had managed to acquire like a very big amount of political autonomy, and so they were basically tasked with reining them back in. And it was also at this point that the Louisiana Purchase happened in 1803.
Yeah.
Where the Americans bought the Louisiana territory that was controlled by France from France.
Yeah.
But this was also being used. This money by selling Louisiana to the United States was being used to finance an invasion of Britain. Of course. But also, oddly enough, the Americans had borrowed from British banks in order to make this. In order to make this purchase, meaning that the British were basically funding an invasion of themselves.
Which sounds very British.
It sounds very very British.
It sounds very loud.
Yeah. Yeah. It was at this point as well that the Treaty of Amiens allowed him to re-establish controls over the colonies, with Saint Domingue being the most profitable of all the colonies, and also they abolished slavery. So during the French Revolution, so the one good thing to come out of Mr. Choppy
was no more slaves.
No more slaves. Which debatable considering how many people he killed.
I suppose they killed considerably less with the lack of slaves.
Yeah, I suppose so.
It's when
that was during the Revolution as well. But it was under this that the expenses to fund the wars were absolutely ludicrous.
Yeah.
Napoleon reinstated slavery, specifically across the Caribbean colonies, rather than the mainland France itself. And it was through a decree in 1794. It only affected the colonies of Saint Domingue, Guadeloupe, and Guyana, and did not take effect in the Indian Ocean colonies, such as Réunion, Mauritius, and Martinique.
Right.
The last of which, Martinique itself, had been captured by the British and remained unaffected by the French law. So the British had pretty much done away with slavery at this point.
Yeah.
So because with losing America, the slave owning population had pretty much halved.
Yeah.
So who cares what they thought anymore?
Yeah.
Yeah. But in Guadeloupe specifically, the slavery had been abolished, and its ban was heavily enforced by Victor Hugo's, I believe it was called, and against opposition from slaveholders thanks to this 1794 law.
Yeah. And
when the slavery was reinstated in 1802, it led to a massive slave revolt led by Louis Delgrès, and it resulted in the law of the 20th of May.
Right.
Which had the express purpose of reinstating slavery in Saint Domingue, Guadeloupe, and French Guiana, and restored slavery throughout much of the French colonial empire.
Yeah.
Excluding Saint Domingue.
Right.
For another half a century, pretty much, while the transatlantic slave trade, despite being harassed by the British to stop slavery, continued for about another 2 decades.
Yeah.
And it was in response to this slave revolt that an expedition was sent under his brother-in-law, General Leclerc,
right,
in order to reassert control of the Saint Domingue. We've been doing this for a while. I'm just trying to get through as much as I can.
Yeah.
And it was after this slight string of victories, to try and reinstate slavery. It was also in 1803, they did have a string of victories. Oh no, sorry. It was the slaves that had numerous victories against the French forces.
Oh.
Because I think this was around the time that the slave revolt in Haiti was a big thing as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does say here that an independent republic in 1804 for Haiti was established during these slave revolts.
Yeah.
And seeing that it was also this this failure in Haiti and in the Caribbean colonies that actually made Napoleon decide to sell Louisiana.
Yeah.
Because it was very profitable, it doubled the size of the US, but
yeah,
the Louisiana purchase only came out to about $15 million in total.
Right.
Well, in then money.
Yeah.
But it was about 3 cents per acre of land. And considering how big Louisiana was then, Louisiana Territory.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably about a third of America.
Yeah, it's the big third, pretty much.
Jeez.
And it took up much as what is now the Great Plains in that territory. As I said, Guadeloupe had slavery abolished. But the peace with Britain was a bit tenuous because they didn't leave Malta as promised, and protested against Bonaparte's annexation of Piedmont and his acts of mediation, which established a new Swiss Confederation because it had been conquered in the French Revolutionary Wars and been replaced with the Helvetic Republic.
Yeah.
And neither of these territories were covered by Amiens, but they pretty much just lit another powder keg, or lit a fuse that was going towards a powder keg. And the dispute, again, it led to another declaration of war not long afterwards.
Yeah.
Because at this point they were getting pretty good at it, but also they just hated each other.
Yeah.
And he had responded. Napoleon had responded by assembling an invasion camp at Boulogne and declaring that every British male between 18 and 36 years old in France and its dependencies to be arrested as a prisoner of war.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people.
What did you think was going to happen then?
I don't know. But either way, the French Empire, this is when Napoleon finally gets himself crowned.
Yeah.
Because during the consulate, Napoleon had faced several assassination plots from royalists, Jacobins, and such as the Conspiration des Pognards. French.
Too many Louis, too many words, too many syllables.
Also known as the Dagger Plot.
Right.
In 1800, and the plot
syllables.
of the Rue Saint-Nicaise, I think it's called.
Right.
Also known as the Infernal Machine. So
why can't I just call it that?
Why didn't I call it that? Anyway, just 2 months after the Dagger Plot.
Yeah.
And it was in January 1804 that his policing forces had uncovered another assassination plot against him that involved Moreau, and was sponsored, in fact, by the Bourbon royal family.
Right.
That had, the ones that had fled anyway.
Yeah.
And on the advice of Talleyrand, even, and he had ordered the kidnapping of the Duke of Enghien, I believe it's called, violating the sovereignty of Baden.
Oh, right.
So,
okay.
But the Duke was quickly executed after a secret military trial, even though he had not been even involved in the plot. And that pretty much did not help at all, because it infuriated royal courts throughout Europe.
Yeah.
Becoming one of the contributing factors for the outbreak of the Napoleonic Wars.
Yeah.
And Napoleon used these assassination plots to further solidify his power by the creation of the imperial system based on the Roman model.
Yeah.
And he believed that a Bourbon restoration would be more difficult if his family's succession was entrenched. And so, after another referendum, he was elected Emperor of the French.
Of course he was.
By 99%.
Yeah, of course he was.
As with the Life Consulate 2 years earlier, this referendum produced heavy participation and bringing out about the same amount as the one that which elected him consul for life.
Right.
And so,
believe what you will.
Here is where he became the French emperor.
Yeah.
So this is where it all kicks off into the Napoleonic Wars.
Yeah. Which will be their own episode. So.
Eventually.
So yeah, that's...
It's a lot to cover.
It is, yeah. Very much so.
There is a lot to cover.
Definitely. That was already quite a lot. That's... What is he there? It'll only be about less than 30, won't it?
No, it'd be about... Yeah, just less than 30.
Yeah.
Well, just over 30, I believe.
He was born in 69.
So he'd be about
35, I think.
35,
somewhat
just
along
about
those
there,
lines, yeah. So, yeah. He's a young man that's now in control of a large empire. I mean, he's not quite as bad as Alexander, but
I mean, we know what happened from this point onwards anyway. But
yeah,
needless to say, this is one of the most defining moments in political history.
Yeah.
Due to Napoleon's actions.
Yeah. Like I say, he's one of the most household names, isn't he? Still to this day, because of said emperorship.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That was Napoleon's rise to power.
From a minor noble family in Corsica to Emperor of the French.
In 30 years.
In just about 30 years. Yeah.
So, all credit to Napoleon. He did that all himself.
Yep.
No help whatsoever.
No, not at all.
So, yeah.
So anyway.
That was that. We'll, like I say, we're going to try and record weekly.
Yep.
So, at least once a week, and we'll get an episode out once a week, ideally as well.
So stay tuned for that.
Yep.
And we'll see how well this goes with the with feedback from the camera.
Yeah. Well, this one will be on YouTube, so hopefully, with it being a video episode and not just a blank screen with audio, should hopefully get a little bit of views going. Try and see if there's any excerpts we can pull out for a TikTok.
Yeah.
Because by the looks of it, for some reason TikToks get a lot of views. It's insane. Like my friend put a video up of just some random picture of an alligator on a beach, and it got like 2,000 views.
No, for God's sake.
There was nothing. It was nothing. It's just a song and a picture of like a crocodile.
Either way, we'll see how this goes.
There's the Instagram, De Historia Pod. There's the Twitter, X, whatever you want to call that. Yeah. So hopefully we'll be back soon with the next episode, which we was planning on making it the fall of Constantinople.
Yes.
/ fall of the Byzantines. That's the idea for the next one.
And its impact across Europe as well.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So that one, yeah, that's hopefully next. Other than that, have you got anything else to say?
No, pretty much it. So thank you very much for watching or listening.
Or both.
Or both. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you.